Welcome to the channel. I'm Christian of ThinkingWest.com, here to talk again about the endless, though perhaps little appreciated Christian elements in The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings has many characters with aspects reflecting a Christian worldview. In this part 2 of Christianity in Lord of the Rings, we'll be exploring various allies of the threefold office of Gandalf, Aragorn, and Frodo that we covered in part 1. So if you haven't seen that, go ahead and go check that out, and then come right back here and find out more in part 2. Some of these other characters bear similarities to prominent Christian figures, while most demonstrate the qualities of a Christian archetype. So let's dive in. Number 1 is Galadriel and the Elves. As is hinted at in The Lord of the Rings and is more explicit in the Silmarillion, elves at large represent something approximating a more perfect man. Elves are fairer, wiser, less corruptible, magical, and more in tune with the natural world. Tolkien's elves call to mind both what man was supposed to be and what man should be. The first is to suggest that elves are like mankind before the fall, mankind in the Garden of Eden. The second is to link the elves with the saintly calling of man. We are called to be saints, to be the more perfect versions of ourselves. So Galadriel is one of the mightiest elves in The Lord of the Rings, and represents a Mary-like nature. The Marian overtones of Galadriel are more explicit in her many names, some of which are the Lady of Lorien, Lady of Light, the Lady of Wood, Lady Galadriel, or simply the Lady. All these names have in common, of course, the word lady, which is a name bestowed upon Jesus' mother in various ways. Catholics often refer to her as Our Lady, particularly in reference to some apparition like that of Lourdes or that of the apparition at Guadalupe. So she is thought to be the greatest saint, much like Galadriel was perhaps the greatest elf left in Middle-earth. And kind of an ode to her, there's a poem or song in Lord of the Rings which kind of highlights this exalted feature of Galadriel. Quote, "In Dwimardine in Lorien, seldom have walked the feet of men. Few mortal eyes have seen the light that lies there ever long and bright. Galadriel, Galadriel, clear is the water of your well, white is the star in your white hand. Unmarred, unstained, is leaf and land, in Dwimardine in Lorien, more fair than thoughts of mortal men." That's from The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. And what you'll notice there is that one of the features that they highlight is that Galadriel's unstained or untainted. And this is much like the belief that Mary was also untainted and unstained by that of sin. So there's even more there than meets the eye at a first reading of The Lord of the Rings. Anyway, more could be said about their similarities, but let's move on to number 2 with Sam Gamgee. Samwise Gamgee is Frodo's gardener and trusty sidekick. He represents ultimately the faithful Christian. He's one of few who never wavers from his mission, and despite his fears, Sam is willing to go with Frodo to his own doom. He steadfastly supports Frodo in the journey to destroy the ring, and often puts his master's needs even before his own. He is the sole companion who follows Frodo, who represents Christ, to Mount Doom, which might represent something like Golgotha or the cross itself. Now, this is not to say that Sam represents Mary or John or Simon of Cyrene, those that we know to be present during Christ's crucifixion. Rather, Sam represents the faithful Christian who suffers trials and tribulations on Christ's account. He's the one who follows in the steps of Christ, as 1 Peter in chapter 2 verse 21 calls all Christians to do, quote, "For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps," end quote. Now, this biblical following in his steps is put again in terms of a journey, a walking with Christ in 1 John. Quote, "But whoever keeps his word, in him truly the love of God is perfected. By this we may know that we are in him. Whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked," end quote. Now, as any fan of The Lord of the Rings knows, there is indeed a lot of walking. Sam is a faithful Christian who walked with Christ no matter the difficulty, no matter the tribulations. Further, as any Christian must fundamentally be, Sam is the supreme optimist in contrast to the solemnity of Frodo. And that's represented well by this quite lengthy, but it's just such a great quote. I have to read it all in its entirety. Anyway, Sam says, quote, "It's like the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered. Full of darkness and danger they were, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad has happened? But in the end it's only a passing thing, this shadow. Even darkness must pass. A new day will come, and when the sun shines, it'll shine out the clear. I know now folks in those stories had lots of chances of turning back, only they didn't. They kept going because they were holding on to something. But there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for." End quote. So Sam recognizes the greatness of the mission and keeps faith that even darkness must pass, and that a new day will come. To be a faithful and hopeful Christian, then, is to be a Sam Gamgee. Now, number 3 might come as a bit of a surprise because it is all about Faramir. Now, his role in the Peter Jackson film adaptations is somewhat diminished from his prominence in the books, and for that reason maybe he doesn't come to mind so much. But Faramir ultimately represents the convert. He's overshadowed by his older brother Boromir, the favorite of their father, Lord Denethor of Minas Tirith, and Faramir enters the story steeped in despondency. When news of Boromir's death reaches Minas Tirith, Denethor demonstrates little care for his now only son Faramir, virtually sending him off to his death in battle. Nonetheless, as a faithful son, Faramir accepts this impossible mission to retake ground gained by the orcs at Osgiliath. However, he does it with the utmost of despair. So a part that's in the book, but not in the movie, is where Aragorn heals Faramir after some wounds he received during the siege of Gondor in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. So Faramir is healed by Aragorn, however, of more than simply his bodily wounds, but also his spiritual wounds caused by the broken relationship he has with his father. Now, during this healing by Aragorn, Faramir exemplifies the Christian response to Christ's, in this case, Aragorn's calling. Tolkien writes, quote, "Suddenly Faramir stirred, and he opened his eyes, and he looked on Aragorn who bent over him, and a light of knowledge and love was kindled in his eyes, and he spoke softly. Quote, 'My lord, you called me, I come. What does the king command?' 'Walk no more in the shadows, but awake,' said Aragorn. 'You are weary. Rest a while and take food and be ready when I return.' And Faramir replies, 'I will, lord, for who would lie idle when the king has returned?'" Now in this case, Aragorn is acting in the manner of Christ. He's calling to Faramir to walk no more in the shadows, but to awake, to call him from his despair into the light of the Christian worldview where hope is born by Christ's sacrifice. Aragorn then further resembles Christ by his request that Faramir be ready when I return, in a clear nod to Christ's second coming. Now in the Bible, Jesus tells a story where he says, quote, "Watch therefore, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep." End quote. That's from Mark chapter 13, verse 35 through 36. And what he's saying there is that I am coming again. So don't be idle, but be ready. And that's the same thing that Faramir says he will do for Aragorn. He will wait for his return. And Faramir's response is a simultaneous affirmation of both his assent and his recognition of Aragorn's rightful kingship. For who would lie idle when the king has returned? This is the Christian response to Christ's calling, a submission to his will and a readiness for his return. Hence, Faramir's journey from despair to joy and honor mark him as a great symbol of the convert. Last but not least is Boromir, the older brother of Faramir. He's another complex character, as he was plagued by one major flaw, that was, well, he wanted to take the ring for himself and his own purposes. Now, he's good intentioned. He wanted to use it to fight Sauron and to help Gondor defeat their enemies, but ultimately he decided to go against the council of led by Elrond and what they had agreed to, and to take it for himself, even going so far as to following Frodo off into the wood to take it by force. However, as Boromir lay dying after a valiant effort to protect Merry and Pippin from the attacking orcs, he repents through his confession to Aragorn, quote, "I tried to take the ring from Frodo. I am sorry. I have paid." End quote. Now, Peter Jackson's version of this scene is actually quite different in terms of dialogue, and wittingly or unwittingly, his Boromir actually exudes an even more Christian interpretation, more explicitly, as Boromir says to Aragorn in this same place and time, quote, "I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king," end quote. Here, Peter Jackson's Boromir gives up his denial of Aragorn's right to the throne of Gondor and submits himself to his will, calling him, quote, "my king," in a final conversion of heart. Thus, Boromir is an archetype of the deathbed repentant, emphasizing the value of turning our hearts even in the last moments of our lives. In this way, Boromir remained high in the memories of the Fellowship, despite his sins against Frodo and the Ring. So there you have it. Galadriel, Sam, Faramir, and Boromir embody a small fraction of the Lord of the Rings' hidden Christian themes throughout their roles, actions, and words. These four figures yield further insight into the mind of Tolkien and the Christian framework of his greatest work. Galadriel's Merry-like status, Sam's faithfulness, Faramir's conversion, and Boromir's repentance all exemplify how such secondary characters hold more significance than might first be imagined, with each character representing an archetype that transcends the world of Middle-earth. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked this video, give us a like and subscribe to this channel to get more videos like this one. There is a part 3 coming, and if you haven't seen it already, go back and check out part 1, where we talked about Frodo, Aragorn, and Gandalf, and who those heroes represent. And if you think you see something in The Lord of the Rings that I've missed, or just wholeheartedly disagree with my points, then let me know in the comments below. I'll be happy to hear from you. Until next time, read on.